So today we're really going to try to dive deep here into the world of Bill Gates. And not just the typical things you hear about like Microsoft and all of his philanthropy work. We're going for the real deal here. Trying to understand the man behind the whole billionaire thing. And you all requested this a while back, so we're finally doing it. A deep dive into billionaire, nerd, savior, king.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating book. It really digs deep into his whole life and how he went from, just this coding genius to this huge titan of tech to you'll see.
Exactly. So let's start at the beginning. Everyone has this image in their mind, right, of Nerd Bill, the glasses and kind of awkward coding all night. But this book really paints a very different picture, don't you think?
It does. It does. I mean, yeah, that image is partly true, but it really overshadows his incredible drive and ambition, especially in those early days at Microsoft. We're talking about a culture that was so competitive, almost ruthless even at times. And Gates was at the very center of it all.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little. What was it actually like back then?
So imagine this. It's like long nights, constantly working under pressure. And everyone there is just completely dedicated to building something the world has never seen before. But it wasn't just about the code. It was about being smarter and faster than the competition. It was about being in charge. And the book really shows how Gates created that whole atmosphere.
So it sounds like that drive was kind of a good and bad thing, right? It obviously led to incredible success. But were there ever times where it went too far?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
The book talks about some of Microsoft's business practices that were, let's just say they were controversial, especially in that whole battle against Netscape. This wasn't just about browsers or anything. This was about who was going to control the entire future of the internet.
Right. The infamous antitrust case. For those who don't remember or weren't even born yet, can you explain what happened?
Yeah, so Netscape had this web browser, Netscape Navigator. It was the biggest one at the time. It was how almost everyone was accessing the internet back then. Well, Microsoft saw that as a threat, obviously. So they created Internet Explorer. But they didn't exactly play fair. They basically forced everyone to use Internet Explorer by bundling it with Windows, which every computer used back then.
Well, there was no way Netscape could compete.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the government saw this and thought, okay, this is just a blatant attempt to monopolize the internet, to use their power with Windows to control this whole new world of the internet. And that's what led to those huge antitrust lawsuits.
This case really changed how people saw Gates. He went from being this tech hero to someone people thought was just trying to crush the competition.
It's true. And it's interesting. He didn't back down at all. So it's he took all that ambition and poured it into something new. Philanthropy.
And that's where that whole savior part of the book comes in, right? But was that really what was going on, or was it just a way to make himself look better after that whole antitrust mess?
I mean, it's never a simple answer, is it?
Right.
The book seems to say it was probably a little of both.
Okay, so he wanted to fix his image, but...
Yeah, he definitely wanted to improve how people saw him after all that scrutiny. But he also really did want to make a difference. Don't forget, this is someone who grew up reading about people like Carnegie and Rockefeller. He saw what they did, and he wanted to have that kind of impact himself.
And that's where Warren Buffett comes in. And that whole friendship always seemed kind of strange to me.
It's pretty unlikely, right?
This tech guy and the Oracle of Omaha.
Yeah. The book actually talks about how they first met. You're not going to believe this. It was Gates' mother who set it up. And apparently Gates was totally dismissive of Buffett at first.
Yeah.
He just didn't get it.
He blew off Warren Buffett.
He did. I can't even imagine.
I know. But then they started talking. And that conversation went on for something like 13 hours straight. They found out they both loved reading and just thinking about things. They even bonded over playing bridge.
Bridge. That's hilarious.
Just a random thing.
Okay, but yeah, their connection went way beyond just card games. Buffett became kind of a mentor to Gates.
Interesting.
Someone he really looked up to. And I think it's pretty clear that Buffett had a huge influence on Gates when it came to philanthropy.
So what did that look like? How did Buffett change how Gates thought about giving his money away?
Well, Buffett really emphasized focusing on just a few really important things.
Okay.
Like making these big bets on problems that could actually be solved.
So not just donating a bunch of money to whatever cause was popular at the moment?
Right. He was all about making sure things were done efficiently and actually having a real impact. And that became super central to how the Gates Foundation operates.
And that's where things get really interesting, right? Because the Gates Foundation isn't just some typical charity.
Not even close.
It's massive.
It's huge.
And they've got this really ambitious, almost audacious approach to solving these global problems.
Exactly. The book actually describes Gates's leadership style at the foundation as imperial, for better or for worse.
Okay, that's an interesting word choice. Right.
What does that look like in practice?
So he's got all these incredibly smart people working for him, right? But at the end of the day, he wants to be the one calling the shots.
He's really hands-on.
Oh, yeah. And he's impatient.
In what way?
Like, he wants to see results and he wants to see them fast.
Well, give me an example.
Well, look at their work on global health.
Okay.
They've put billions of dollars into trying to wipe out diseases like polio and malaria, which is amazing.
Yeah, of course.
But the book shows how they have this very top-down way of doing things.
Okay.
Gates comes from this tech background, right?
Right.
So he tends to focus on solutions that involve technology data, all that stuff, things you can measure.
Which isn't always the best approach.
Exactly. A lot of critics say that they ignore local knowledge and community involvement.
It's like they're trying to solve these problems from a really high level without actually understanding what's happening on the ground.
Yeah. And that Gates's desire for these quick wins can mean missing the bigger picture.
That's really important to think about. It is. It's not enough to just throw money at something. You have to really understand the situation and all the complexities.
Exactly.
And that's something the book comes back to over and over again.
That tension between his big vision and the reality of how hard it is to fix these problems.
And it's part of what makes this whole story so fascinating.
It's like he's trying to save the world, but is he going about it the right way?
Yeah.
And then there's the whole thing with his lifestyle, which is pretty hard to ignore.
What do you mean?
This is a guy with multiple mansions, a private island, a car collection most people can't even dream of.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge contrast.
Here he is trying to solve global poverty, but he's living this incredibly lavish life.
And it's not just him. The book talks about how his family office has billions of dollars and employs thousands of people just to manage his money.
Wow.
It makes you wonder if that level of wealth is even sustainable.
Even if it's being used for good. It's a lot to process. And it's not just the lifestyle, right? It's also things like, well, the book talks about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of the story that's hard to square with this image of him as this, benevolent philanthropist.
It's really hard to understand. Like, even after everything that came out about Epstein, Gates was still associating with him.
Right. It makes you question his judgment, for sure.
Definitely. So what was the deal with that? What do you think was going on there?
Well, the book kind of suggests that maybe Gates was a little blinded by Epstein's connections.
What do you mean?
I mean, Epstein knew everyone, right? Powerful people, scientists, academics. And Gates has always been someone who loves to learn, loves to connect with interesting people.
Yeah.
So maybe he saw Epstein as this, gateway to this whole world of fascinating minds.
It's kind of ironic.
Totally.
This guy who's already incredibly wealthy and successful still felt drawn to someone like Epstein.
It's very human in a way.
It is.
It shows that even someone like Bill Gates can make really bad decisions.
And then, of course, there's the whole divorce.
Right.
That was huge news. Melinda French Gates really used that moment to kind of take control of the narrative.
For sure. It challenged this whole idea of their relationship as this perfect partnership.
Because it wasn't.
According to the book, not really.
Yeah.
It sounds like there was a real power imbalance there.
How so?
They talk about how Gates, he really struggles with being challenged.
Oh, wow.
Like he's so used to getting his way.
Interesting. And do you think that same dynamic played out in his philanthropy work?
It seems like it.
Yeah.
There are stories in the book about tension between Gates and Warren Buffett.
No way.
Yeah. Buffett was apparently really concerned about how bureaucratic the foundation had become.
And how they were spending their money.
Right. Which is interesting, because Buffett has always been such a huge supporter of Gates and his philanthropy.
Yeah, that is surprising.
But it sounds like even he, who is known for being pretty hands-off, started to distance himself towards the end. It really makes you see things differently. Here's this guy who spent his life trying to do good in the world, but it hasn't been without its problems.
Right. And you start to wonder, can someone with that much money and power ever really be the savior he's often portrayed as?
That's the question, isn't it? Is Bill Gates a force for good? Or is it more complicated than that?
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
And I think the book does a really good job
Of showing all the different sides.
and making us really question what it even means to try to change the world.
Exactly. Because it's not always a simple answer.
Not at all. So what are your final thoughts on all of this?
I think it's a really important story. And not just because of Bill Gates himself, but but because it makes us think about
Mm.
wealth and power and responsibility
Mm.
and what it really means to make a difference.
I think that's a good place to leave it. It's a lot to process, but it's definitely a conversation worth having.
I agree.
So to everyone listening, pick up a copy of the book and let's keep this conversation going because it's one that we need to be having. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.